I want to talk about a whole bunch of stuff today. We're going to go through a whole lot of concepts and a whole lot of topics. But I want to start with some really foundational stuff, which I think is super, super important. Really starting with, why do we do this? Why is there a security track at a software conference? We'll start there. Why would we have a security track at a software conference? One really easy answer. Because it's our job. Just like everything else we're going to do, it's our job. This is the responsible room. There's a whole lot of really shiny stuff going on at GOTO. This is the stuff you need to be listening to right now. Go tell everybody else that. And that's fine if they didn't go to this track, but go watch the videos, right? And not just this conference, all of the conferences that have security tracks, go watch those videos. They're really important. But in the why, right? In the why do you do this? It kind of boils down to two answers in most cases. These are the two answers. We'll speak in terms of emoji for most of the time. Money, and loss thereof, and loss of life. Right? Those are you can ask why. You can give yourself a bunch of superficial answers. This is pretty much why. Right? At the very bottom of the stack, you don't want to lose money and you don't want to lose life. I'm not going to talk so much about the loss of life and protecting the loss of life because there's a whole different philosophy there, and I don't tend to play in that space very often. So I'll tend to focus more on loss of money, where I'm comfortable and nobody has to die. And I will tell you this, if there isn't a reason, stop doing it. I want to start there. This is one of the first things I do when I go anywhere, as I tell them to turn some stuff off. Because there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the name of security that's just insane. When you have 7 factors to place your lunch order, we have a problem, right? There's differences here. Now, that's the loss of money, not loss of life. Maybe there's a point in protecting lives that matters. But security has to have reason. It needs to come with purpose and intent. The things you do in security should have a reason. Doing the security thing, because security is not the way to do this. You're going to spend too much money on the wrong things. That's why I want to talk to you about threat modeling today. This is one of the vehicles that gets us to being able to focus and figure out what really is important, right? You have to be able to understand your threats before you can figure out how to apply controls against them. If you just are applying controls and not understanding who your threats are, you might be doing completely nothing, right? It's doing something, but it doesn't have any value, right? You have to understand where you are in relation to where others are and how far away you have to be from that threat. It's important. This saying is very true. You just have to be faster than your friends. That's it, right? Most financial breaches are crimes of opportunity, right? Very, increasingly often these days. But for a long time, it was just, they happened to be vulnerable to something that a script figured out, right? And they got in and they did some stuff. And you just got to be hard enough, right? The barrier has to be just high enough that they go somewhere else. That's it. It's not you have to be perfect. You have to be annoying enough that they go somewhere else. That's the goal. That's where you want to be. But I want to talk about understanding threats. That's step one, is figuring out what's going on. I Google for threat modeling, and it's a bunch of words. And they have some meaning. But what I want to talk about today is a distillation of all that. What I really want to talk about is drawing, documenting, and prioritizing. That's it. That's what I want to start with. We can get really complicated later, but I want to start here. I'm not going to cover methodologies of threat modeling. If you came here for a lesson on methodologies, I'm the wrong person to talk to because I don't like any of them. It's possible to stride down the block on your trike and get some pasta, but I will ask you to do that on your own time because all that stuff is complicated. If you say tomorrow, I'm going to go back and start threat modeling at work, and you have to read a book on threat modeling, you're going to fall asleep. It's boring. But we can ignore all the rules, and we can start with a few things. So this is what I want you to do when you're done with this conference, or maybe just when you have a break. a few simple things to get started, and then we'll build a foundation from that. First thing to do, open your diagrams. If you don't have them, start them. That's fine too. But it starts with drawing. And every time you have a line, add a protocol. So this box is connected to this box. How? How's it communicating? When you have every box in place, label the assets. What's on that box, and what may be going over that line? Or maybe what may be staying on that box? Draw boundaries around network groupings. I have stuff in my data center, and I have stuff in a customer. It doesn't have to be super granular, but big picture stuff. Just draw some kind of trust boundaries. Start with just that. That'll give you probably a better diagram than you had in the first place, which is awesome, and that's good for just general purposes. But now, the next thing I want you to do is label all the controls. For every asset, figure out what controls you have in place for those assets. Anytime you have an asset with no control, there's something to think about. Notice I will not say there's a risk here. There's something to think about. Identify the points of entry. How does somebody get into the system? How do they communicate with the system? A lot of times, a web app has, a web port open, and there's probably some kind of management. But what else? How else could somebody get in? And that's not malicious people. That's everybody. How does everybody get in? Next, we just stop the tech stuff entirely. We talk to product and business and figure out what their goals are, right? What does the business want to do in the next 6 months? What are they trying to go? What products are they going to introduce you to that you're going to have to then figure out that may change those boxes and lines? How might that picture be different in 6 months? What are their goals? What are the risks? What does the business have to lose? If you don't understand what the business has to lose, you can't do security. Actually, you probably can. You shouldn't do security. If you don't understand what you're protecting, you're in the wrong game. You will do the wrong things because you're uneducated. This is so important. You have to know what the business wants to do and hopes to accomplish, and really what can happen if something goes wrong. You've got to be intimately familiar with that. To spend time with the business. And then when you're done, take those business risks and map them to those tactical risks you found. Right? All those little areas where there was a lack of control or weak control, figure out if that weakness in control maps to something that could hurt the business. Because I will tell you that if you don't have an intersection of those two, you do not have a risk. Because it doesn't go back to money or loss of life. It's just a thing. Maybe it's a missing control. That's okay. Maybe you're fine with that. So you want to find the most important things. This is about focus, not about what all is wrong. And yes, we can go in and say, all these things are wrong. What I want is these 4 things are crucially important to the success of our business, because that's what matters, and that's how you get buy-in to do what you need to do. And again, that comes to criticality, right? It's ranking things. So just, if you have 20 things, make a list of 3, the 3 most important things. If you have a list of 100, make a list of 2, right? The more things you have, the shorter your list should be for those things to focus on, because it's just too big. It looks something like this. This is just a sample. This is a tiny sample. It doesn't have all the things that could go wrong. But this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? We have a couple of trust zones. We've got a couple of things communicating. We have a computer talking to a web application, and a web application talking to a database. And we have login credentials. Right? We have login credentials, and we have one control, authentication, right? That control is saying, I'm gonna ask you to authenticate, which means we have to have a username and password or a token or something traveling across the wire to get authenticated. Now, immediately, this should be super obvious. There are a couple of things wrong here. What are they? What's that? Protocol. Why? It's missing an S, isn't it? Right? But how obvious? That's super obvious. We drew a picture and went, oh, duh, right? We really should be doing this. And when I say protocol, I mean protocol. Don't say HTTP. It should be HTTPS or HTTP. Label it appropriately. They're separate protocols. And when you look at that asset, there's other things too, right? What about the database? That asset, those credentials are on the database. There's no other control there. What might we want to do with the database to protect that asset? No, not encryption. What may we want to do? No. He was close. Hashing. Yes, yes. I will be pedantic about that. Yeah, you want to hash those passwords, right? You don't want to store them in plain text. And there's a whole bunch of things. We can go down the list and do a whole bunch more with just this little tiny example. But that's the point, right? You look at this, and it should make it obvious to you, right? The point of this drawing is how obvious are the things that are missing. And if you look really hard and you can't find it, move on. That's fine, right? Down the road, you'll get better at this. And down the road, you'll probably hire somebody to help you with this, right? There are professionals that can help you do this exercise a lot more effectively. But we can all do this tomorrow. Every single person in this room is equipped to do this. And that's why I challenge you to start here. So once you have this foundation, right? I haven't talked to any at all about threat, about what people are capable of. I haven't, nothing at all yet, right? But once you have that foundation where you have drawing, assets, controls, protocols, all that stuff, then you start to create the attack scenarios. That's where you find the emoji for the person that looks like a weird cyber hacker thing, and you plop them there. You put them in different places, right? You put them in the trust zone, which happens to be a coffee shop. And that's where it becomes super obvious why that S matters, right? You put them on the network and go, oh, there's a scenario here. Let's say I'm in this coffee shop, and I'm about to log in. And this other person's on the network. The real threat here is somebody could sniff this password. That's going to be on the network sniffing this password. What's the capability needed to do this? How advanced does somebody have to be to do this? The answer is not at all, right? Anybody can download a tool and do this. So marginally capable. So the threat is a large community. There's a large people. Anybody in this room could do this right now, easily, right? So the control is very low. The threat capability is low, but it can overcome the controls. We don't have any controls in place, really, other than just somebody that maybe can't open a browser and install a tool. So we can change the control and make that attacker have to work a little bit harder, right? We change the capability requirements of that attacker. We add the S. Now the attacker has to do something different. Their capability requirements go way, way up. Well, maybe not way, way up, but up a little bit. More than just nothing. But that's what you do. You think about, on the PC, how do they have to get on your computer? What are the capabilities of an attacker to get on the computer to steal them? What are the capabilities of somebody being inside the data center, or inside the web application, or inside the database? What do they have to do to do that, right? What are the capabilities an attacker would have to do to get there? Also, think about the controls you might have to stop them, which is going to basically increase what they have to do to get in. And no, nobody's Fort Knox. Everybody can get in. But if it's, maybe 1% of hackers could possibly get here, or, the Mossad, because they can always get in, maybe we're going to be okay with this. And this is where the threat modeling kind of ideation comes into play. Who am I protecting myself against, right? There are very few people in this room who need to protect themselves against nation states. Maybe somebody's going to attack you, but you don't want to play that game if you don't have to. You're going to lose. You just are. Unless you're also working for the government, you kind of want to win. But most of the people in this room, not everybody, doesn't have to play that game. You want to play the game against the people who are driving by, or maybe have a vendetta against you. Maybe you work for a publishing company, or a newspaper online. Yeah, social media, lots of angry people, accusations, things can happen, right? So you have to think about who those threats are. And this exercise is where you start to think about who those threats are and what they're capable of doing. And the next thing is, what are they after? What do they want to get? What are they trying to get from me that can cause this loss? And I want you to focus on reality. This is not this weird game where you play, Mr. Robot and try to figure out, the deepest, darkest, nastiest hack somebody can do. Throw those off the table, right? Focus on the stuff that you can have, that anybody can think of right now, right? Do those first. Those are the most obvious, and that's where most of the breaches come from. It's not the super advanced, malicious hacker. It's the drive-by because somebody forgot to patch something. I mean, that's where a lot of this happens. They're the easy mistakes, and those are the ones that get capitalized on almost all the time. And again, it's about defining the capabilities of the attacker. Because in a minute, I'm going to talk to you about risk. And risk is a game where we have to understand how capable an attacker is and how capable our controls are. And we're going to do some simulations. And that capability is super important. And again, back to business. Without a business justification, without a business loss, there is no risk. I will say that full stop every time. Now, if you're going to loss of life space, of course, that's part of the risk as well, and you want to account for that. But you have to have an impact that really is a tangible, observable loss. If somebody breaks in and sits in this chair here, what's the problem? Is there a loss? Maybe the GOTO conference didn't get their money for the ticket, but is it that bad? Maybe not, right? You have to think in those terms, right? One of my favorite scenarios is the bald tire. If you have a tire, there's no tread on it. You can see the inside of the tire coming out. What's the risk? Sure. Did I say anything about a car? I just said there was a bald tire. If I attach that tire to a rope and make a swing out of it, what's the risk? It's going to fall? I didn't say anything about a human, right? There's a scenario that has to be complete here. A bald tire there's nothing. I don't care about a bald tire. It's a bald tire anything can happen to a bald tire, right? It doesn't matter, right? I haven't applied it to something that could create a loss. Yes, if you add it to a car, you could have an incident. The car has to also be driving, right? You could add somebody in the rope swing, and maybe the rope is frayed. They could fall off and get hurt or die, right? Something else has to happen in order for that to be real, tangible, right? So when you think about loss events, you have to think about what you're standing to lose, not what the vulnerability is. Vulnerability is this much of a giant equation. And that's how we get to driving risk. So there's a risk methodology, and there's lots of them out there. The stuff I'm going to identify with closer than others is the FAIR framework. And you can do this any way you want to. I'm not telling you to go out and use FAIR tomorrow. I personally love it, and I tend to kind of adapt to that. But the equation kind of fits, no matter how you do this. And there's a few things, right? How often am I going to have a loss event, meaning something impactful? And how much is it going to impact me when it happens, right? So I'm going to lose this much money or this much life this many times a year is kind of an annualized function. And down below, there's a whole bunch of stuff we got to do. And this chart actually goes way, way deeper than this, but we're going to start here. And so the stuff on the right, that's the business stuff, right? How much is it going to impact us? How much money are we going to lose? And at the end of the day, this is what you're going to communicate. But the how often is the trick here. That's the technology piece of it. So vulnerability is effectively just how often can the attacker overcome the controls I have in place? Plain and simple. I have a control. They have a capability. Can their capability overcome my control? If it does, we will have a loss event. The threat event frequency is how often am I seeing contact? How often are people trying to overcome my controls? It's not how often are they hacking. That's loss event frequency. How often are they contacting me? How often are they trying to do these things? And so when you think about this, threat event frequency is one of the things we have to focus on. Because we have to be able to quantify this, to be able to qualify loss, or risk to the business. That loss event frequency is something we actually have the data to do. We can take these measurements, and I'll show you how in a minute. This business stuff, worst case and probable. Risk is a range. Risk is never a number, because if risk was a number and you were accurate every time, there wouldn't be so much money spent on risk. We'd know what it was. Risk is a range, right? What's the probable loss, and what's the absolute worst case thing that could happen? Because my risk is somewhere in between there. And maybe I'm wrong, but at least I have a range. And so to curb risk, or to satisfy risk, you can either lower that, or you can narrow the margin, right? A risk range of very low to very high tells you nothing. It just tells you you might have a lot of risk, and you might have no risk. So you can focus on lowering the margin, or lowering the actual impact. In some cases you can, but ultimately we end up at risk. Now, the business stuff we can talk about, and we can actually put real information in there. Every company's going to have a loss tolerance table. Like, how much money can I lose before I shut the doors, and kind of go work back from there. You can produce that stuff. That that threat event frequency, that's a little bit more tricky, right? You can identify your controls. You can have a pretty good idea of what it takes to overcome those controls. But we actually have our first legitimate barrier here. How often? How many of you right now could tell me how often? How many of you think that's a problem? A couple hands, really? No, this really is a problem, right? This is from the last talk. He talked about this. How many of you know what normal is? Right? This is super important. This intelligence is super, super important. How many of you have ever seen a security issue and had somebody say, probably not a big deal. We probably don't want to invest in that right now. More hands, right? So this is really important. Those of you who just raised your hand should have also raised your hand and say, you think this is important. Because when you have quantifiable data, you can show somebody why. If you have a guess, you don't have an argument. If you have data, you have an argument. Or part of an argument anyways. And that goes to threat event frequency. How often? So let's just start here, right? Back to our hacker emojis. If we start with our very simple threats, the listener in the coffee shop, we know the threat event frequency of this is probably reasonably high. This happens especially in big cities. People do this all the time. They sit there and just sniff stuff out. Or one of the employees is doing it all the time because somebody paid them to. Or they're in school and they're learning about this stuff going, oh, this is really cool, I'm going to go do this, right? And the capability is so low that you're going to have an actual risk here. How many of you joined the conference Wi-Fi today? Just kidding. Yeah. How many of you joined the conference Wi-Fi and then immediately VPN'd into something to, yeah, okay, more hands. The rest of you, activity for tomorrow or next time you go to a conference. Consider a VPN. Pay the $5 a month to a VPN service so you don't have to manage it. That's fine. It doesn't have to be technical. But you probably want to do that. Or tether to your phone, right? Conference Wi-Fi, plain text, not the greatest. But that same scenario, that exact same thing that I'm talking about in that last slide is happening right now to you. There is somebody in this hotel that's probably listening to the traffic. There's a good chance anyway. But the thing is, the answer to how often is usually this. Right? This is the answer to how often most times. Yeah? And so what do we do when we don't know and we're trying to derive risk? What do we do? We guess, right? We make guesses. How good are humans at guessing? Provably bad. Actually terrible. Humans are awful at guessing. Now there are ways to be better at guessing, but humans suck at guessing. And in order to identify risk, we have to know how often. We absolutely must know how often. Or at least be reasonably close, with an order of magnitude, let's say, right? We want to know reasonably, to a close proximity, how far off we are. It is incredibly important. So we have this information. It's coming to us when people are accessing our applications, right? The information is present. Whether we record it and watch it is different, but we can apply the information. Threat event frequency is a solvable problem. We have the data. We can record and generate real metrics on threat event frequency. So I promised a couple things. I will show you the quick and dirty. And this is something, again, you can do this tomorrow. This does not take much time, as long as you get a hold of your logs. That's the gotcha. You can get a hold of your logs. We'll do EL without the K, right? Elasticsearch and Logstash. We can pull these two tools. They're free. You can download them and run them on your machine. Grab the log files locally, boot them up. You want to feed, let's say web server logs. Start there. Feed that into Elasticsearch. Let me show you real quick what that looks like. Well, it doesn't look like that, but unmirror for a second here. So with just a little bit of code, configuration really, not even code, configuration, you can boot up Logstash or Elasticsearch with no anything, right? Just boot it up. Give it a path to files, tell it where you want to start, and tell it how you want to parse it. Most web servers will fit in the common Apache log, even though it's called Apache. Even Nginx will do this okay. You can create your own custom patterns or whatever you want, but this is good enough to get you a start right now. You can do this, and you can turn Logstash on, and it will suck everything into Elasticsearch with just a small amount of stuff right here. That is literally the barrier for starting to ask questions. And then, of course, we want to ask questions. So once you have it in Elasticsearch, then you ask some questions, right? How many failed logins did we have? Going back to the last talk. How many successful logins did we have? How many patterns of failed logins with a single successful login did we have, right? Those questions are trivially easy once you have them searchable. So I'll go a few starter questions, but I'm also going to go back to a quick demonstration of just some things you may want to look at. And I'll bump the font up a little bit here. I took these from a static website. How many times did I have a bunch of 404s? More than 10 404s. How many times did I have an invalid request? Invalid request on a static website is anything other than a get, because that's all I'm going to do. So you look at things that are just not supposed to happen. You can start with the obvious stuff. These are questions, by the way. These are not, they don't give you the answers, but they give you some questions. They don't give you capability. They don't give you intent. They give you something to think about. But they also give you how often, right? So I had, these people in that period of time, I think it was maybe a month worth of logs, this many actors had excessive 404s. Now, if I look and I really dig in, I might find out that one of them was a scraper, one of them was a Burp Suite or an Acunetics or Qualys, some kind of security scanner. You might figure out more about what they are when you dive in, but you know immediately, hey, I have a bucket of things, and I can derive maybe some intent, maybe some capability, but also I can derive an event frequency. How often are these things happening? How many people and how much? I can put them into buckets. And of course, you dive in from there. But what I had here, after I sucked into all this stuff, was just a couple of really simple filters, right? The invalid request filter was just tell me who didn't have a GET request, and aggregate it by client IP, right? Something very simple to ask. The question doesn't take much, but you give them some information. So these are the kind of things, like I said, you can start this tomorrow. There's nothing complicated about this. And this stuff all get published. So you can actually just steal it. 404, same thing, right? Find me a responsive 404, and then group them by IP. So very simple things to ask of the data once you've sucked it in. Now, yes, this stuff gets way more complicated than this. It's not actually that easy all in. But this is where you want to start. Just start asking some simple questions. You get the hang of what you're seeing, what you might be experiencing, but then again, this all leads to how often. This is all the goal of how often. Solve that threat event frequency problem. So, a couple starter questions, right? How fast? Velocity. You can just say, hey, show me everybody who was making requests of more than one request a second. Or, show me everybody who was making uniformly distributed requests. Right? Humans don't do that. Humans don't make a request once every second or once every 5 seconds. The humans don't do that at all. So if you're looking for bot traffic, how fast is a thing? You have normal patterns, right? Did they follow those normal patterns? And I'm going to talk about that much more shortly. What was the user agent? User agent is spoofable, but if they're not clever enough to spoof it, and the user agent was curl, you know it's probably not a human. Or look at the user agent. There's a whole bunch of user agents you can kind of just knock out immediately. Did they fail the intended action? Whatever that action was, did they succeed or not? Did they fail to log in? Did they fail to add a credit card? Did they fail to check out? Did they fail to update something, right? Any kind of a failure of action, there's reasons for that, but why? right? Why did they fail that? Maybe they failed the update profile 10,000 times. Why would somebody fail to update their profile 10,000 times? Probably because they're trying to figure out how to do a SQL injection or cross-site scripting. They're attacking that form, right? Usually. I mean, you can look at the contents, but these kind of patterns are not normal, right? Somebody might fail to update a couple of times, and they might just say, I'm done, I'm going away, or they might succeed after a couple of times. Now, that success is just as important as that failure in a lot of cases, but you still want to be able to record both. And then, did they exhibit a known malicious pattern? There are just things you know to be malicious right away. How many of you take credit cards? How many of you are getting carded? All of you should raise your hands. So carding is basically the exercise of testing stolen credit card data against a validator. You're that validator if you take credit cards. You authorize the credit card, you say yes or no, they get a response of whether this card's valid or not. There's a very identifiable malicious pattern here. I go to that thing and I hit it a whole bunch of times, right? You can see it, it's an easy to identify behavior. You can demonstrate that, you can log that. You can create a behavioral pattern for that, right? So you're gonna have a lot of those. But again, you can see a threat actor with a clear intent and a capability. And that's where you can drive that risk. So make the goal determining how often at first. Solve that problem right off. And then you can get more advanced in what you're detecting, but figure out how often. Then finish those assessments. Example, and this is something I will push out as well. Jupyter Notebooks. I love them. They're wonderful things. Mostly because I've been a fan of Mathematica for a long time, and they finally made it not $1 million by having somebody else do it. But I made a little Jupyter Notebook for risk assessments. And all you do is plug in some data. And this text is important, right? You identify what asset. And this goes to tangibility, right? What am I going to lose? You have to have an asset. If you don't have an asset, you don't have a risk. And at first, you're going to go, oh, I have a missing control. I'm missing password hashing on my database. That is not a risk. That's a control. I'll talk about a couple books at the end, and I encourage you to read those to identify risk and understand it better. But this is where we go when we say we have a threat community. Who are they? What are they after? They have a capability. How strong are these attackers? And you start to fill in some numbers and how confident you are in them. And then you describe your controls. What am I doing to keep this threat community from doing what they want to do? I have firewalls, and I have antivirus, and I have the OWASP top 10 implemented, and I have monitoring, and I have alerting, and I have all this stuff that I've done. You list everything here, and you talk about how confident you are in your controls. And then you subtract some of that confidence because you're overconfident. And that's true, you should, right? You either reduce your confidence level or you reduce your control. One of those two numbers should go down from where you think you are, because you're probably not that good. And then, of course, that missing equation, threat event frequency, how often, right? And this is an annualized thing. So maybe you say it's never going to happen in a year, so you cut it down. It's a fraction, right? Maybe this is once every 10 years, so it's 0.1, right? And that's real. You want to think about how much you might lose a year on this, and you annualize it. And then again, magnitude. What's the probable, what's the worst case? How much money do I think I'm going to lose? And then you qualify that, right? How much money can my business lose before I consider it high, medium, low? What does my business take that as? If you're a giant company, $10 million is no big deal probably, right? Okay, that sucks, but we move on. It might not even be material. So you have to talk to your business and figure this out. And when they tell you, go away, you're not supposed to know that information, then go to your boss and say, help me figure this out, right? Because you may get a blocker, especially in a larger company. If you go to the CFO or you go to the financial folks and go, hey, how much money would we have to lose to close the doors, right? Like, why are you asking that question? That's insane. So you're gonna get some challenges at a larger company. So work the channels, find a way to get the information, explain to them what you're doing, have the security team help you. If you bring a security team this stuff, they're going to love you. So they will help you, I promise. And then, of course, we add some science. So it's very common in risk community to do Monte Carlo simulation. Right, so taking those numbers, it's going to generate a distribution of samples. And those samples can be used, that really is the first part of a Monte Carlo simulation. And that's what these numbers mean. Control strength or capability all become a distribution. And then you derive vulnerability from that. So you take that, and for every single point you sampled, you say, did the threat overcome the control. That's it. Is this greater than that? That's really the vulnerability function. You do it for all the samples, and at the end you have a vulnerability. Here's how vulnerable I am based on 100,000 Monte Carlo simulation samples. Here's how vulnerable I am. When you're done with that, all you do is just multiply that by the amount of times you think it might happen. So I have vulnerability, I multiply it by the number of times a year it's going to happen, and here's the frequency of loss. Here's the number of times a year I think this might happen. Now, we're starting to get into actual, math, and we're talking about guessing, right? So again, this is where I say it's a challenge to quantify this stuff because you're going to put it in numbers and apply real math to it. When you do that, you have to be fairly accurate to get a reasonable result that you can act on. This is where I say automation of these event sources and signals is almost vital. It is vital to making it work, to giving yourself real, trustworthy data. This is a hard problem. It's not easy. And then, of course, at the end, you get a risk, and the risk is a range, and it's in dollars and cents. Why is it in dollars and cents? Why is our risk in dollars and cents? Huh? Because we have to go to the business and ask for money. And we have to demonstrate, I think I'm going to lose this much money, or we're going to lose this much money this year. I want to spend a fraction of that, because if you say more than that, they're going to tell you to go away. I want to spend a fraction of that to make this go away, or to reduce it, right? Maybe we reduce the margin, maybe reduce the top end, whatever that is. I want to somehow reduce the risk. And then, of course, you treat it. Like I said, I'll publish this stuff so you guys can play with it. But more importantly, the idea here is trying to quantify this risk. You then are able to deliver value by focusing on these specific things. You threat modeled, you've assessed the risk for all these threats you've come up with, and you said, here are the top few that I think are going to affect my business in a tangible way this year. And then you go to the business and say, I would like to attack these problems. The answer would probably be, okay. I mean, almost every time I've done this kind of an exercise, the answer is, okay, seems reasonable, right? You're not giving them a giant list of to-dos. You're not giving them a bunch of technical nonsense. You're just saying, I'm trying to save the business money or reduce the amount of loss the business could have. That's a very reasonable thing to work within a business. You will be much, much more successful than, oh my God, we never patched our systems, and it's 30 days now, so we got to patch all our systems, right? That's a terrible argument to make to the business. They're going to go, okay, why? This group is in critical response, and if you patch their systems and they go down, somebody might die, right? So no, I don't care about that, right? This risk is greater than that risk. So by speaking in terms of real risk, the business can look at what you're doing, look at what they stand to lose in other places, because they know more about other places than you do, and go, this one, right? And that's fine. You've done your job. Now you can move on. Then we get better at this, right? So we're going to fast forward. We're going to go and we're going to pretend that we're great at this now. So we walked away, we've done this tomorrow, and we got good at this. We're all doing this actively. We're focusing on the right things. Life is good. And then you realize that things change. And in fact, they change a lot, like every day. What you're doing, what your controls look like, what your threat landscape looks like. It changes almost daily, right? And then you realize the exercises that I just talked about, they take a lot of time. Like, these take excessive amounts of time and resources. Most companies will do this once a year because they satisfy a checkbox that says, we spent a month doing this for a year. We looked at our architecture and our risk, and we did this big table, and we feel confident about it, right? And what good is that 6 months down the road? Right? It's probably not true 6 months down the road at all. It's definitely not true a year down the road. Now what do, right? We've got this cool process that we do, but it's inefficient, and it's out of date all the time, except for that 1 month we do it. I hate that. That's terrible to me. So I want to automate this. I want to take everything we just did and put some automation around it. I want to apply a little more science to what we're doing. I want to build the threat scenarios automatically. That's what I really want to do. I want to generate my threat capability and my threat model. I don't want to just have a threat model. And we'll start at a manual threat model, but I want to move to something automated, right? This is where it gets a little weird. But it's all about behavior. And I want to key on behavior. Both predictable and irrational behavior can be modeled. It doesn't matter what it is, you can usually find a way to model it. There's outliers, of course, there always is. But most of the time you can model this. You think about the requests, all the things that come in. And this is more of a web application thing. There are other things on the network that apply differently, but it's the same behavioral pattern, right? A series of web requests as a state transition, a directed graph. You just are making state transition matrices. I'm going to go here, then I'm going to go here, then I'm going to go here. And then I might go back to here. But all it is just looking at what they're doing and plotting it. You can start to produce Markov chains for the behavior, right? A Carter has a Markov chain, or maybe 10, right? There is a clear Markov chain that you can apply to a credit card scammer or a credit card verifier. Somebody doing a brute force login attack. There's a clear Markov chain that identifies that. And you can even go further, right? Are they silly? Are they just using Adobe's breach dictionary and going, one by one down the list, right? There are lots of things you can do where you take the behavior and apply it to just a series of state transitions. And you can do this automatically. You have the data, right? You know where they went next. You isolate them, you identify them, you plot them, you then create reproducible behavioral patterns. And at first you do this manually. It's totally fine to do it once or twice, just kind of on paper, or you may create a model in code, and you test it, and then you figure out how to produce these. But then you have the data to automate this and automatically produce these Markov chains. Then you create a big threat model, for your entire corporation or your entire application around these identifiable Markov chains. And you're going to miss some stuff, and that you should expect to. But you have automatable threat intelligence now, right? What you've done is create a series of things, a series of threats that you have identified, that you see, and you can then test frequency on. So I say, oh, this many times a year, I'm seeing these patterns emerge. And what you then get is something interesting, right? We identify malicious and good behavior, right? We also want to do this for good. This is not just a keep people out thing. This is a make security go away thing. If you're in retail commerce, online, what is one of the worst things you can do in terms of not capturing a sale? Friction of any kind for security. Logging in, typing in a credit card number, any of that. But logging in. Let's say somebody goes to your site maybe once or twice a quarter. They're going to forget their password most of the time, unless they reuse the same password everywhere. And then they've probably gotten breached. But they might not remember their password. And that thing might not be compelling enough for them to go through that reset process and go, right? But if you know where they come from, what device they were on, what the behavior looks like, you can just let them in. You don't have to make them log in. Nobody says they have to log in after 45 days. That's insane. If they log in after 45 days, you don't have a good enough control to figure out if they're them or not. That's why, right? The real why is something different. So you can say turn off the login. If they come from the same location, the same IP address, the same device, whatever that is, and then go straight to make a purchase, okay, fine, right? Let them go. Don't put the friction there. There's win for the business there. At the same time, you can say, oh, they went in, and the first thing they did after they made their sale was change their shipping address. Okay, red flag. Maybe I'm going to cancel the order, right? So it's not that you have to prevent the login from happening or the purchase from happening, because that's not a loss event. The loss event is you ship the thing, and now you can't get it back. So you lost the thing, and you get a chargeback for it. That's a loss event, right? So you're still going to prevent the loss event. You never shipped the good, right? So it's a different thinking about down to that loss event. What am I doing to prevent the loss event? What am I doing to prevent the login? The login is a thing to the loss event. It's a piece of that chain. So you want to think differently about how you apply controls and why you apply controls, right? Turn off those CAPTCHAs. If you don't have to do the login, turn off the login. And no, don't go to your business tomorrow and say, this guy told me to turn off my login. Please don't do that. But there are things you can do, especially around this identification of behavior, that allow you to be less aggressive with security. And the business will love you if you can intelligently do this. I've seen lifts in conversion and lifts in sales skyrocket after doing things like this. And some of it was, we're going to do this, deal with it. And I went, oh, crap. And that's how I figured out some of this stuff, because I had to just deal with it. But that's also OK. Constraint is creative sometimes. But then again, you block people when they do dumb stuff. And when they're on their way to doing stuff, actually, first you record that, because you want to know how often. But when they start going down a known path, right? They've hit a few of these things. You go, I think that's probably what they're doing, right? Okay, fine, I'll watch them. I may not block them yet, but I think they're going down a path that's gonna lead here. You can actually, you know what they're gonna do. This is so cool, right? You record it, but you can take this so far, right? You can start to predict the next move. There's a whole bunch of scenarios where I can go, oh, the next request is gonna be that. And at this point, we've modeled it enough that I can look at it and just tell you before without even looking at a model. But you can start to predict the next event. What's really cool is now this malware would evolve. And so as it evolves, you can start going, oh, I think you're gonna go here. You didn't go here? Let me put a little bait out there and see what you do. And you start to basically bait them. And then you update your models in real time. Oh, version next of that malware or that bot came out. I automatically adapted to it, updated my chain, and then moved on. So you can identify things with the version. Not only in what am I seeing and what versions am I seeing of this thing. This gets really cool. Or this becomes real intent, real capability, and a lot more quantifiable than this often, right? So I'm gonna go quick here and wrap up. Identifying intent and capability is super important. This is vital to risk analysis. Good risk analysis has to have that capability. And also the intent, what are they after, right? What's that asset and how good are they? And how often? If you can't answer those questions, you really can't quantify risk in a reasonable, tangible way. But these Markov chains can show both of these for you, right? Generating these chains are really, really important to being able to just automate this stuff. And then you build the threat models in real time. Every day, you're generating threat models from your data. And every day, you're running these scenarios. You have these bank of risk scenarios. I gave you the code. You can just run this code. It's our code. You don't have to do it in the Jupyter notebook. And you get a range. And you can apply the day's events to your current risk scenarios and figure out whether or not your risk is going up or down. You can literally do this, I mean, in real time, but I would say batching it every day, right? So real time is, ish. But this is where you want to be. Every day, you're just generating threat scenarios, threat landscapes based on automation and evaluating your risk and sending it all the way back up to the business. The security team sees it, the business sees it, the development team sees it. You're seeing what's happening right now. You're creating continuous risk analysis based on actual, actionable data. And this is really this is the holy grail. This is kind of we all want to be here kind of end state. This is the goal, right? All the time, what's going on? Are my controls good enough? That's what a security team is going to ask. If you can feed the security team how good are my controls based on what I'm seeing, they can adapt. And you can adapt as a development team as well, right? You can do things based on right now. And that doesn't mean adding controls. It also means subtracting controls, right? You can say, oh, maybe I don't need to do this. Maybe I'm just not seeing this threat anymore. It's gone away. I can turn this off because it was causing me a decrease in conversions or some kind of substantial impact. So that you don't just say, don't use it to add controls. Use it to remove controls too. Just as important. Security is a delicate balance. It's not just about security. In fact, it's never about security. It's about the business. And this allows you to be in communication with the business and say, here's how we're doing. Here's our health check. What do you want to do next? And so quantifiable information is awesome, and that's where I want to get to, right? All that manual stuff is awesome. Get to quantifiable. This is where our automation and our tooling plays a big part of this. And you can't do it all, and you can't do it all well. This is just true. So you have to figure out what matters and learn to focus. And that's this threat modeling exercise taken all the way through is focus. If you take one thing away, even if it's not threat modeling, just learn how to focus. This applies to way more than security, but in security especially, learn how to focus, identify, and then call for help when you need it. That's fine. It's okay to call for help. You don't have to know it all. But figure out where to call for help on the most important things. That's it for me. Threatmodelingbook.com is a book on threat modeling. It's probably the best book on threat modeling out there. Take it with a grain of salt, but there's enough good ideas in this book that I think it's worth reading. If you want to read it and take a review, John, who speaks next, actually wrote a really good review of the book. The bottom doesn't have a good .com link. This is basically the book on FAIR and understanding risk. I've had a chance to work with the authors of the book before. I really appreciate what's in there, and this is my kind of opinionated view on risk. I happen to agree with them. Don't take my word. Do whatever works for you. As long as you're doing it, that's what I care about. And on that note, I will thank you all. Remember to rate the talks, please. We love the feedback for the conference, especially if you didn't rate the last talk, please go ahead and do that, and the next talk as well. Have a happy lunch. Thank you.